This is Frank Foster's first speech for Communications 101 from Sherry Simpkins as the instructor. The speech I'll be delivering today is What's in a Game? A look at how games are made. So everyone has heard of or knows about Mario, Zelda, and Sonic the Hedgehog. But have you ever thought about what goes into making the games that they're a part of? Most of you are probably thinking that video games are a waste of time. They're a form of entertainment that doesn't matter, or that they're full of content that is bad, it's bad for you, is violent, or is a form of candy to the brain. And while that may be a separate argument altogether, I think that it might be interesting to show you the type of work that goes into making a video game. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been an avid gamer since I was a kid. I first started with a Nintendo Entertainment System that my parents bought me when I was 6 years old. I played games from a young age all the way through to my adult life, and while I've spent a lot of time getting to know the industry and how games are made, I've just started this year to decide to make my own video game. So I figured this would be a great opportunity to teach people the steps that are needed to make a video game. So while on the surface, games seem to be lighthearted, they seem to be sort of a fun experience, there's actually quite a lot that goes into making a game. What I hope to show you is what do game developers do, the steps that go into making a game, and the skill sets of the teams that build them. So what is a game developer? What do? Do they have to be super smart? Do they have to know computer science? Yes, they do, but more importantly, they have to be able to guide the entire process from start to finish. Video game developers are very similar to directors of a movie. They have to make sure that they're guiding their team, that they're coming up with a budget, that they're designing the levels, that they're making sure that the vision stays correct. The first video game developer could be was considered to make a game similar to Pong back in the 1950s. The gentleman's name was physicist William Higginbotham. He created the system on the ENIAC computer, which was one of the first computers ever made. It had a very simple waveform display. Today things have developed much further and have become much more advanced than back then, for sure, but the principles stay the same. Video games, for those who don't know, are a form of interactive entertainment. They can be happy, they can be sad, they can be angry, they can be a simple puzzle, they can be a complex story, it can be a number of different things. But for the most part, video games are something where a player inputs commands into a computer, and those commands progress through levels, they move a character, they cause something to happen. Video games can be developed with a small team or with a large team, from anywhere between an individual person making it all the way up to humongous teams of 500 or more. It can be as simple or as complex as what the developer wants it to be. Making video games does require the skill and use of a computer, but there's a lot of other skill sets that kind of build outside of that. You don't have to use a computer for a lot of parts of it. So what goes into making a game? Well, first of all, the developer has to have an idea. They have to come up with something that they want to make. Do they want to make an adventure game? Do they want to make a board game type game? Do they want to make something simple or something complex? They have to first think about the game's style. How is it going to look? How is it going to play? What is the objective? What are the goals? They have to progressively design the different components and decide the outline that they'd like to follow. Then, once a developer has come up with those ideas, they have to think about their budget. They have to think about, well, how much money do I need to make this game? Because they have to hire people. Or they might have to buy assets. They might have to buy certain parts of their game because they themselves aren't skilled in a certain area. Once they've outlined that budget, once they've got the idea going, then they have to build the team that builds it. So, game developer may need an artist, or they might need a programmer, or they might need both. They might need someone who's good with sound, someone who's good with music, someone who's good with all sorts of different things. Do they need one artist? Do they need 10 artists? They have to decide on that within the bounds of their game and within the bounds of their budget. So once a team is decided and the game style is set, then you can start making the game. Now most of you may think that, oh, well, the first thing we need to do is start designing the graphics. We need to create something that looks good, that is beautiful. But that's not necessarily the case. Most games don't even use art. They use blocks, they use shapes. I'm sure some of you have played Candy Crush. That game is just simple squares and circles. Or Pong is another great example. It's basically squares and a block. So the first thing they have to start on is the mechanic. How does the game play? How does it work? And they have to come up with the core design. They have to design something that will keep players engaged, that will entertain them, and make sure that it feels like a challenge. I don't know if many of you have played Mario, but if you look at the core of Mario, the two things that Mario is made of is running and jumping. You don't need to have enemies. You don't need to have a goal even. If the running and the jumping is good, then the rest of the game can be built upon that. You can add powers, you can add abilities, but they have to make sure that the core of the game works well. Once the core is decided on, once you have that basis, then you can start adding things. You can start adding abilities. You can start adding challenges. A game like Tetris, for example, could add a timer, or it could add other shapes, or it could add different functions and things that cause the game to become more complex. And once those exciting parts, the fun parts, the parts that you enjoy and you want to learn about, the parts that make up the game, then you start building it, you start testing it. That's the next portion of it. You have to make sure that what you've made works well. Are players engaged? Do they like to keep playing? That's a big part of making sure your game works well. As you're testing and as you're designing, you then move on to the art. How is it going to look? How are the players going to perceive the game? Is this something that's going to be dark? Is it going to be light? Is it going to be happy? Is it going to be sad? That's where your artists and the team of designers come in. They help craft and shape that world into what you want it to look like. And part of that process is collaborative. One thing that may look good to you may not look good to somebody else. You want to have as broad a stroke as possible in designing the look and the feel of the game. A big part that a lot of people don't realize is music and how important that is to a game and game design. Creating and crafting music, there was a study done for movies actually that said that 80% of a movie watching experience is the sound and the music. So I don't think Lord of the Rings would have been as dramatic without the music, or Star Wars wouldn't have been as iconic without the music. It's very important. It's a very important piece of that puzzle. So once you've got that done, once you've tested, once you put all those pieces together, then you can start to market your game. You can talk to so many different marketing agencies. There are different ways to put your game out into the world. Steam is one. It's an online distribution center. You can put your game on there and you can start contacting ad agencies to advertise. Word of mouth is a great way to share what games you've made and share with other people how your game plays, what it looks like. Trailers on YouTube. Giving your game to people in the media. There's all sorts of different ways to market. But once you've marketed it, once you've tested it, once you know that you have a good product, that final step is how you bring that game to life. So now that we've discussed what goes into making a game, let's talk about the team that designs it. With all these steps, there's a lot to consider, and you have to have skilled people to work with you and work under you. Everyone is important. There isn't a single person who isn't key to the production and design of a game. So you either have one person who has to be specialized in a lot of things, or a number of people who specialize in a few things. That way you can have them either focus dedicated on those single things, or be able to have broader strokes depending on your budget and how you want the game to look. So the first type of person that would work on a game would be game designers. People who would design levels. They design the look, the feel. How are things going to progress? Will one thing make sense later? They help design and craft the experience. So they help teach the rules to you through words or without words. with the design of the game, they're in charge of making sure that that goes in the direction that you want it to. Artists are another form of person that would work on a game. There are people who do 2D art, standard paper art. There are people who can make 3D models, who can animate, just like we'd watch in movies. There's a number of different styles and designs and crafts of art that those artists can bring to the table. And generally, the more skilled your artist, the better looking your game is going to be. Music, speaking about that importance as well. Someone who can bring sound to life to make your games sound well and to make your games bring that emotional impact as well. These musicians can use digital design, they can use computers to write and craft their music, or they can use traditional instruments as well and recording them. There's so many different styles that can be brought to the table in that way. And lastly are the programmers, people who actually build and compile the game. Once you have all these broad pieces of art and design, you still have to have a way to connect it all together, and that's the job of the programmers. Without them, there really is no game. You have to have all those pieces together to make everything work. And you have to design it in the computer languages and using the computer programs that make up how that game comes together. Because otherwise, how else would you have a game? It's just like making a sandwich without bread. With that being said, you can see how much goes into a game. So on the surface, like I said, games look very lighthearted, but now you can see that there are many pieces of the puzzle that go into making a game. You know the basics of making a game, you know what a game developer does, and what skill sets are needed to make a game come together. Games, in my mind, are one of the most challenging and rewarding forms of entertainment that everyone can enjoy. I hope that I can make games someday, to bring a little lighthearted fun to everyone, and to put in all the hard work required to make something enjoyable for all. Thank you.